Number 92, this is historical topic 9.3, the end of the Cold War, and our theme is America in the world. We have one learning objective, and that is explain the causes and effects of the end of the Cold War and its legacy. So we're starting with Reagan's strategy in the Cold War. Reagan asserted U.S. opposition to communism through speeches, diplomatic efforts, limited military interventions, and a buildup of nuclear and conventional weapons. So as far as speeches, his most famous one happened at the Berlin Wall in the city of Berlin in Eastern Germany. The city had been divided into two after the 1961 building of the wall, and then East and West Germany were also divided at a different point or a different site inside of Germany. He repeatedly called the Soviet Union the evil empire, even as he was trying to hold diplomatic relations with the General Secretary, Mikhail Gorbachev. At the end of the Berlin speech, he calls on Mr. Gorbachev to tear down this wall. So his rhetoric was definitely confrontational when it came to the opposition to communism and the Soviet Union. Now, he did try to come up with diplomatic means in trying to end the Cold War, like I previously said. He held 3 different summits with Mikhail Gorbachev on trying to reduce the amount of intermediate-range missiles that both countries had, and also to negotiate the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which the Soviet Union had invaded in 1980. That was the reason for why the United States boycotted the 1980 Russian or Moscow Olympics in the summertime. He also negotiated peace between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the country of Israel. You see future presidents like Bill Clinton continued to get those two sides to meet with each other and come up with a sort of lasting peace. All right, as far as military interventions, Reagan followed a containment style policy as well. So in Grenada, a Caribbean island, he helped prop up a pro-United States government in its invasion of the island country after a more communist regime or a pro-Cuban government had taken over. And the success there really emboldened Reagan to continue that type of involvement and containment policy in other parts of the world. In Nicaragua, we were continuing to send aid to the Contras, who were the forces that were against the pro-communist government of the country of Nicaragua. And we are also mixing in the profits from Iran arms sales in sending that money to the Contras. That's what ended up becoming a large scandal within the Reagan administration, because aid to the Contras had been banned by U.S. law in 1984, and the U.S. government under Reagan continued to do it past that year. So when it came to light, there were people in Reagan's cabinet that got in trouble for it as a result of the Iran-Contra affair. And then as far as weapons buildups, we had a new B-1 bomber, new missiles, a buildup of 150 Navy ships, and this new type of weapon that was really more a theoretical weapon than a real weapon, called the Strategic Defense Initiative. This was supposed to be a series of satellites and lasers that would help to dismantle any attack of a long-range missile to the United States, and it would neutralize any threat that the Soviet Union could pose, because these satellites were waiting in space already for any sort of attack that would happen. Now, the showmanship in portraying the Strategic Defense Initiative had a lot more of an effect than the actual weapons did, because the weapons never really came to fruition. It was much more about bluffing that we had the capability to come up with something like this. And all of this spending on defense and new warships and new airplanes doubled the defense budget by nearly 2 times in 5 years. So in the first 5 years of the Reagan administration, the defense budget had ballooned. And even though Reagan cut spending on a lot of domestic programs, the increase in the defense spending made it so that the US was still spending more money, coupled with tax cuts that the Reagan administration had put in place. This is leading to greater deficits every year, adding to the national debt. But the spending on the defense industry was necessary because Reagan was betting that the Soviets would not be able to keep up with this kind of spending, and that they would eventually have to back down, which turned out to be the truth. All right, so here's some causes for the end of the Cold War. We had increased US military spending, Reagan's diplomatic initiatives, and political changes and economic problems in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union were all important in ending the Cold War. As far as political changes in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985 tried to implement a more open society by ending censorship and repression of individuals speaking out. This was called glasnost, and it literally translates to openness. One of the problems with glasnost is that the population in the Soviet Union had been repressed and censored for 40, 50 years at this point. So the first thing that they did whenever they were given this new freedom to speak out was speak out about their discontent and against the government. The 1986 Chernobyl disaster also shaking the confidence of the Soviet Union and the people inside that the Soviet Union would be successful in a confrontation with the United States. We also have the Baltic states calling for independence. In the map to the bottom right, you see the Baltic states are to the west of Russia. These numbers 2, 3, 8, 10, and 15. Lithuania, Estonia, Romania, they're calling for their independence, and eventually they will slowly get it towards the end of the 1980s, early 90s. There was an attempted coup on Gorbachev, which he survived in August of 1991, but by December of 1991, the Soviet Union disbands, and each president of each Soviet Socialist Republic becomes a leader of the territories that they had been elected to. As far as economic problems, the Soviet Union had an economic slowdown through the 1980s. In order to try and end this slowdown, Gorbachev tried to implement the perestroika reforms, and these were free market reforms that meant to help the economy. They would allow people to sell certain things for profit and for gain, as opposed to just making things to benefit the state. But the programs or the reforms were not in place long enough to really see an effect if they would have worked or not, because the Soviet Union broke up before they could be fully implemented. All right, so the end of the Cold War led to new diplomatic relationships, but also new U.S. military and peacekeeping interventions, as well as continued debates over the appropriate use of American power in the world. So the new diplomatic relationships are in the form of a diplomacy with the new Commonwealth of Independent States, or the CIS. These are all the former Soviet Socialist republics are joined by this new organization, this new alliance, and so that's who we are dealing with to try and make new peace treaties, trade deals, any sort of other diplomatic interaction. We are dealing with the CIS. Some former Warsaw Pact nations will join NATO. That will not make Russia very happy, and the new relations with Russia and Putin, to be exact. So Putin is elected president in the year 2000. And he has continued to be either the head of state or the head of government from the year 2000 through the present 2021. And he will continue to be in office for a couple more years in this term that he has going. And he will be eligible for re-election once that term ends. The new peacekeeping interventions, we saw some in Iraq in 1990, in Bosnia in 1995, in Kosovo in 1999. The United States led a multilateral effort in all of these countries, whether it was backed by the UN or backed by NATO, to end attacks on neutral countries or to end attempted genocides in the Balkan region with Bosnia and Kosovo. So this new debate over America's role, we're starting to see that the United States is still going to continue to be a leader in world affairs, especially after the interventions in the 1990s. and one that is favored by the rest of the world as long as there is multilateral or cooperation, meaning that we have the support of other countries or international organizations. Once we get to the war on terror starting in 2001 and the Iraq War in 2003, where our actions are starting to become more unilateral, meaning that they are decided on by ourselves, we are going to lose some popularity around the world, and we're also going to lose some allies' support in these endeavors. All right, so that was it. Here is our recap. Reagan continued a U.S. foreign policy of opposing communism in the Cold War, which included continued arms buildup. So you can compare this to how previous presidents led the United States during the Cold War with the containment policy or the détente policy under Nixon. The Soviet Union fell after independence movements from within became successful, and finally the end of the Cold War brought about questions about new U.S. foreign policies. All right, so that is it for this lecture. Please come back for number 93, and I will see you then.